Economic history moves like a pendulum. The Roman Empire created the first continental marketplace, bringing Syrian glass into British homes, while German grain fed Egyptian cities. When Rome fell, trade collapsed into local fragments for centuries. The Silk Road reconnected east and west until the Mongol Empire's collapse shattered it again. European colonialism forced integration through conquest. Then the Industrial Revolution linked continents with steamships and telegraphs. Two world wars broke these connections, only for the post-1945 order to rebuild them stronger than ever. With each swing between integration and fracture, a pattern has emerged. Political stability enables economic connection. Trade creates prosperity, but also dependency. The winners grow confident, while the losers grow resentful. Eventually, a shock, like a war, pandemic, or revolution, reveals the vulnerability of this interdependence. Nations pull back, borders harden, and the world splits into competing spheres. This continues until the costs of separation exceed the risks of connection, and slowly, carefully, the cycle begins again. Today is also a turning point. The age of seamless globalization has ended, but not in the way most expected. The world isn't deglobalizing. Instead, it's fracturing into blocks that will define the next era of human commerce. This summary traces how we built the integrated world, why it broke apart, and what might emerge from the pieces in the years to come. Berlin, November 9, 1989. The wall finally falls, and with it collapses the entire architecture of a divided world. For the next 3 decades, something remarkable happens. Former enemies become trading partners. Supply chains stretch across continents like vast networks of trust. A factory in Detroit depends on chips from Taiwan, which needs rare earth minerals from Africa, refined with German machines. The world becomes one giant marketplace. This was the peace dividend in action. Defense budgets shrank while trade volumes soared. Between 1990 and 2008, global trade grew twice as fast as the world economy itself. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 and became the workshop of the world. Eastern European nations entered the European Union. Companies stopped thinking about national borders when planning production. If you wanted the most efficient supply chain, you sourced from wherever made economic sense, whether that was Vietnam, Mexico, or Slovakia. The numbers tell an extraordinary story. In 1990, cross-border capital flows totaled about $1 trillion annually. By 2007, that figure had reached $12 trillion. Your pension fund probably owned Chinese stocks. Chinese banks held American mortgages. Saudi sovereign wealth funds bought European infrastructure. Money moved freely, seeking the best returns regardless of geography. Technology accelerated this integration. The internet made distance irrelevant for many services. You could hire programmers in India, accountants in the Philippines, designers in Brazil. Financial markets operated 24 hours, passing trades from Tokyo to London to New York in an endless cycle. A shipping container became the symbol of the age, standardized boxes that could move seamlessly from ship to truck to train, carrying everything from smartphones to soybeans. But beneath this smooth surface, tensions were building. The same integration that brought prosperity also brought vulnerability. The 2008 financial crisis showed how problems in American housing markets could freeze credit in Iceland and force factory closures in China. Winners from globalization celebrated, but those who lost jobs to overseas competition grew bitter. By 2016, when Britain voted for Brexit and America elected Donald Trump for the first time, the political consensus supporting open borders and free trade had already fractured. The peace dividend era assumed economics would always beat politics. That assumption died somewhere between the first Trump tariffs and the pandemic supply chain crisis. The world has entered a new chapter. You walk into your local electronics store in late March of 2020, searching for a webcam for remote work. The shelves are empty. This small frustration is your first glimpse into a supply chain revolution that will go on to reshape global economics. Within weeks, container ships are sitting idle while factories are shuttered. The just-in-time delivery system that made modern life so convenient suddenly reveals its fragility. The pandemic exposed dependencies most people never knew existed. A single factory closure in Malaysia could halt automobile production in Germany. Ships backed up at the port of Los Angeles created shortages in Chicago. The price of shipping a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam jumped from $2,000 to $14,000 almost overnight. Suddenly, executives who had spent decades chasing efficiency started talking about resilience. Governments that had championed free markets began discussing strategic autonomy. Then came February 2022. Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine and energy became a weapon. Natural gas prices in Europe increased fivefold within just months. Germany, which had built its industrial might on cheap Russian energy, faced the prospect of rationing power to factories. The fertilizer that helped feed billions required natural gas to produce. Food prices surged globally. Nations that had never taken sides during the Cold War found themselves forced to choose between Russian resources and Western financial systems. Meanwhile, the technology rivalry intensified beyond tariffs and trade restrictions. October 2022 brought unprecedented semiconductor export controls from Washington to Beijing through the CHIPS and Science Act. These rules did more than limit silicon chip sales. They prohibited American citizens from working with Chinese semiconductor firms. They blocked equipment that China needed to manufacture advanced processors. The message was clear. Economic interdependence would no longer override security concerns. Each new crisis accelerated the fracturing. When the Ever Given container ship blocked the Suez Canal for 6 days in March 2021, it delayed $400 billion in trade. Countries started questioning whether distant supply chains made sense. Companies began talking about friendshoring or moving production to allied nations even if it cost more. Mexico overtook China as America's largest trade partner in 2023. Vietnam and India saw investment surge as manufacturers sought alternatives to Chinese production. The acceleration was measurable. In 2019, mentions of reshoring in corporate earnings calls numbered in the dozens. By 2023, they exceeded 2,000. The age of efficiency above all had ended. The age of choosing sides had begun. In Brussels, Washington, and Beijing, planners now draw maps that would have seemed absurd in 2010. These maps show the world economy dividing into distinct spheres, each with its own rules, standards, and supply chains. The unified global marketplace has given way to something resembling economic NATO alliances, where your trading partners are determined by your security commitments. The American bloc goes beyond traditional allies. It includes most of Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and increasingly India. These nations share more than military cooperation. They coordinate semiconductor policies, screen each other's investments for security risks, and build supply chains that deliberately exclude rivals. When the U.S. restricted technology exports to China, the Netherlands and Japan followed within months. This coordination wasn't a coincidence. Weekly calls between economic officials have replaced the old assumption that markets alone would determine trade flows. China has responded by building its own sphere. Beyond longtime partners like Russia and Pakistan, Beijing now courts Southeast Asia, much of Africa, and parts of Latin America with infrastructure investment and technology transfer. The Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, now looks less like a development program and more like the foundation for an alternative economic order. Over 150 countries have signed cooperation agreements. China provides the capital, technology, and markets these nations need. In return, they adopt Chinese technical standards, payment systems, and increasingly Chinese rules for data and internet governance. Between these poles exists a fascinating third group, the multi-aligned. Brazil sells soybeans to China while maintaining security ties with America. Saudi Arabia prices oil in dollars but considers accepting yuan. Singapore hosts American warships while serving as China's financial gateway. These nations extract maximum advantage from competition between the blocs, raising prices for their cooperation and avoiding exclusive commitments. The numbers reveal how deep this division runs. Since 2020, trade within blocs has grown 3 times faster than trade between them, and investment follows similar patterns. American venture capital into Chinese startups dropped from $19 billion in 2018 to less than 2 billion by 2024. Meanwhile, Chinese investment in Southeast Asia tripled. Technical standards are diverging too. Two different versions of 5G networks spread globally, incompatible with each other, forcing countries to choose which digital future they want. This isn't your grandparents' Cold War with its rigid ideological boundaries. Modern blocs are porous, pragmatic, and primarily economic. Yet the direction is unmistakable. And the question facing every nation and company is no longer whether to choose sides, but how to manage the costs of that choice. A South Korean battery manufacturer faced an impossible decision in early 2024. After investing billions in Chinese production facilities, new American regulations demanded they choose: keep the Chinese operations and lose access to U.S. electric vehicle subsidies, or abandon their Chinese investments to maintain American market access. There was no middle option. This dilemma has been seen across boardrooms from Stockholm to Sao Paulo as the economic middle ground disappears. The pressure comes through countless channels, but particularly from international technical standards bodies. Once boring organizations where engineers debated industrial specifications, they are now battlefields. At the International Telecommunication Union, American and Chinese delegations spend months fighting over encryption protocols and artificial intelligence standards. European companies that once profited by selling to everyone now find their neutrality interpreted as weakness by both sides. A German chemical firm loses Chinese contracts for cooperating with American sanctions, then faces American scrutiny for its remaining Chinese ventures. Small nations feel this squeeze most acutely. Lithuania discovered the cost of defiance when it allowed Taiwan to open a representative office in 2021. China blocked Lithuanian exports and pressured multinationals to sever Lithuanian supply chains. The message resonated globally. Symbolic gestures carry economic consequences. Meanwhile, the Solomon Islands learned that accepting Chinese security assistance meant Western development aid would dry up. Every partnership now comes with exclusions. The erosion shows up in corporate structures too. Technology companies that once operated globally now maintain separate entities for different regions. Your smartphone app might have 3 versions: one for the US and its allies, another for China and its partners, a third for the few remaining neutral markets. Cloud computing services store data in regional silos that can't interconnect. Research collaborations that drove innovation for decades are now collapsing as scientists face restrictions on sharing discoveries across block boundaries. Financial systems reveal the deepest fractures, however. Payment systems that should be neutral infrastructure have become geopolitical tools. SWIFT, the messaging network that enables international bank transfers, excluded Russian banks after the Ukraine invasion. China accelerated its alternative system in response. Now companies must maintain separate treasury operations for different blocks, increasing costs and complexity. A Malaysian palm oil producer needs one system for American customers, another for Chinese buyers. The mathematics of neutrality no longer compute. Switzerland's famous neutrality brought prosperity when it could serve all sides. Today, that same stance brings scrutiny and pressure from every direction. The profitable middle ground that enabled globalization's winners has become a no-man's land where businesses and nations pay increasing costs for declining benefits. Imagine someone in 2035 trying to explain to a young colleague how business worked before the fracture. They describe flying to Shanghai for a conference, using the same phone everywhere, and accessing identical communications platforms globally. The young colleague looks puzzled, having known only a world of digital borders and regional systems. This generational shift shows just how deeply the fractured age has reshaped expectations. The question now isn't whether the division will deepen, but how humanity will adapt to this permanent economic reality. The technological race will define the next decade's winners. Artificial intelligence development now happens in parallel universes, with American and Chinese models trained on different data, serving different values, and producing different outcomes. Quantum computing breakthroughs won't be shared, they'll be hoarded, with each block racing to achieve encryption-breaking capabilities first. Green technology, which once seemed like humanity's common project, has split into competing systems. Western wind turbines and Chinese solar panels incorporate incompatible smart grid protocols. Even the transition away from fossil fuels follows divergent paths. New formations will emerge within and between the major blocs. Watch for an Indian Ocean economic zone linking India, Indonesia, and the Persian Gulf states, leveraging their combined demographic and resource advantages. African nations, tired of choosing between Washington and Beijing, are looking into creating their own payment systems and development banks. Latin America is experimenting with regional supply chains that reduce dependence on both Pacific powers. These subblocks won't replace the major divisions, but they'll create additional layers of complexity. Successful adaptation strategies are already visible. Companies that maintain flexible corporate structures, like economic shapeshifters, are thriving by presenting different faces to different markets. Estonia is building digital infrastructure that can interface with both Western and Eastern systems. Rwanda has positioned itself as neutral ground for bloc negotiations. Manufacturing is returning to a hub-and-spoke model, with final assembly close to end markets, while components flow within bloc boundaries. The winners here are those who've accepted the new reality rather than mourning the old efficiency. The human impact varies dramatically by geography and generation. If you live in a bloc's core, whether it's Seattle or Shenzhen, then life continues much as before, just with fewer global options. Meanwhile, border regions are experiencing more turbulence as policies shift. Older workers who built their expertise on global integration are struggling to adjust. Consumer prices have risen about 15% above what unified supply chains would have delivered, but most people accept this as the cost of security. By 2035, the fractured age will feel as permanent as globalism once did. Children born today will find it natural that the world contains multiple internets, parallel financial systems, and incompatible technologies. Choosing sides won't be a stance, it'll just be business as usual.